it was agreed that if any of them died during the mission, he would be embalmed and buried inside what we now know to be Stay Behind Cave. After 56 years, the tunnel and cave system, which would have been their quarters and their prison, were uncovered by 4 young men from the Gibraltar Caving Group. This is their story.
As a group, as such, we only started really seriously looking for a Stay Behind Cave for the last 2.5 years. But personally, we've all had an interest in military heritage, the military heritage of Gibraltar, for quite a few years now. But we really didn't have the expertise or the knowledge or the know-how of how we could go around finding this cave.
A lot of people think to this day that this was like a sort of a red herring and that the place doesn't really exist. When did you become aware that you were hot on the trail of finding this place?
We were sure we had found it when we had discarded all the possibilities of we had gone through the process of elimination, and we've started discarding what we knew could not possibly be Stay Behind Cave. For example, we knew that they had to observe the bay and the straits, so we knew that it had to be on a high place, so we discarded all the lower areas. So after looking at a few red herring areas like Coptic Cave, which was a favourite of some people, we discarded that because it was too low, so we started coming up, coming further up and up, until we entered this tunnel system, and we said to ourselves that if it had to be anywhere, it must be this tunnel system.
Where you're sitting now used to be covered with corrugated sheets, and you said that when you walked through this area you felt some draft.
Yeah.
So you knew there had to be some openings nearby.
Yeah.
So what did you do then?
We were further back on this same tunnel. We said that it looked rather suspicious, so we concentrated on we concentrated ourselves on this very tunnel and said it could be around here. But as we got nearer, we felt a draft. It was a really heavy levant, and we felt a draft coming through the wall, and they said the winds must be coming from somewhere. So we decided, we came up to this same corner, we followed the draft. We saw that the wall behind us was bricked up, so it couldn't come from over there. So we followed the draft and came up to this very corner.
Right.
We removed
the corrugated sheeting.
The sheeting. We removed some brickwork, and immediately after removing the brickwork, we thought that there might be a rock face behind it, but immediately we removed the brickwork, we saw the doorway, and we went wild, obviously.
Yeah.
We were really excited. We broke in, we're trying not to break as much as, being as sensitive as possible. We broke into the doorway, we removed the rubble, and the tunnel opened up, and we found it.
When was this? Let's put a date on this. When did you discover this?
Christmas 1997.
97. So this has been like the best kept secret for the last 3 months, has it not?
Yes, we've kept it really secret. We've been really secretive about it because we really don't want anybody to come here and destroy it and start taking souvenirs and start putting graffiti on the walls. It's a really well kept tunnel. I've visited lots of tunnels on the rock, like most Gibraltarians have, and the tunnels are in really poor shape because of constant use. But as we're the first ones, we believe we're the first ones to be in here since it was bricked up after the Second World War.
56 years ago, to be exact. 56 years ago, in 1942.
We really want to preserve the tunnel as is, and hopefully some organisation, maybe the Heritage Trust, will like to take it off our hands. But that's not for us.
That's in the future.
That's in the future. For now, we want to preserve it as well.
And enjoy the views, of course,
yes,
from the observation posts.
Yes.
Right.
Military history speaks volumes of the ingenuity of man in war. The very idea of leaving behind 6 men sealed into a tunnel system sounded far-fetched, but it was an ingenious plan. Many Gibraltarians have heard of the Operation Tracer, and the young men of the Gibraltar Caving Group were no exception. Richard Durrell takes up the story.
Well, my theory is that they constructed the actual passage before going into the entrance of the hole. in such a way so as to bury the bodies inside this passage.
If somebody died,
If
of course.
somebody died, of
right,
course.
Right, yes.
They constructed the floor area with loose bricks, which was not cemented, such as this one. And
But that's what you found on the floor, all the bricks?
all the loose bricks along the passage.
Right.
And if they had to bury someone, they would uncover the actual...
And was there enough rubble below the bricks, you reckon, to be able to bury somebody?
There are no rubbles. There are about 3 to 4 layers of bricks,
Of loose bricks?
to uncover and make the actual
Grave,
grave,
so to speak.
and then cement it on it.
Right. How long have you been aware of Operation Tracer?
I've been pretty well aware since I was 14 years old, and I've been trying to locate the area. In that time, it was quite difficult to get into these areas because it was pretty restricted.
How soon after you got the hot trail, so to speak, in this tunnel, how long did it take you to break in, through the brick wall and actually, survey this area?
Well, just an hour or so.
In an hour you managed to break
Yes, we did.
the bricks in the entrance?
Yes,
Uh-huh.
it wasn't that difficult to do
Right.
because we found the draft and it was just a small hole we had to break into.
Can you describe your feelings when you actually discovered this sort of historic,
Well, the actual feeling was when we reached we were still in a critical, we weren't sure yet until we reached to the actual western OP, and as soon as we saw that concrete slab reconstructed for the actual view, that gave us
that is the absolute proof.
that's the absolute proof, yes.
There are also other items, of course, the radio room,
Yes.
which we've seen. We also know from records that they used to generate electricity via a hand-operated bicycle type of generator, which we've also seen. But for you, perhaps the irrefutable proof is that
Slab,
that concrete
Yeah,
slab
yeah.
that fits very tightly into the observation post.
correct.
Now, the other observation post on the Mediterranean side, so to speak, on the east side of the rock, doesn't need a slab. No, it's quite a...
You see, it's so well concealed. No matter what particular angle you are from the outside perimeter of the location of that hole, it's not.
You're not likely to be seen, so you could
won't be able
actually
to be seen.
you could actually
Very well concealed. Yeah.
climb out of the observation post and spend some time on that sort of balcony ledge, yes, amongst the bushes
Yes.
there, I suppose. If you weren't wearing anything shiny or anything to attract attention, you could camouflage yourself and perhaps do a little moon at night or whatever, at least. Now I find, Richard, that although the legend is a very daring feat of intelligence gathering, had it taken place, of course, these men knew that they were going to be walled in, and if they died, they would have to be buried here. There was no question of that. There was no question of them coming out of here for at least a year after they would have been walled in. But having seen the place, I find that there's actually quite a lot of room. It doesn't seem to give a feeling of claustrophobia. What do you think? There were 6 men. We're talking of 6 people, like the same in our party now, cameraman, myself, and the 4 of you.
Well, if you take a look up inside of the hole,
The hall is quite big, isn't
it's
it?
quite big. I imagine storing it up with food and all sorts of equipment.
You reckon that would have been the main storage area, that large
Main
hall?
storing area and where they lived. Yeah. So they did have. I think it was pretty small for them, really, with all that storage place and all the beds inside there.
We haven't found any traces of bed, have we?
No, we haven't.
No bunk beds or no beds.
No. The thing is, they prepared everything so as to, when they decided to move in, then they would fit in all the beds and the equipment.
You haven't managed actually to get any sort of released papers, and do some extensive reading on this operation, because I understand that the manual that the men had has never been found, no, that would have given us every indication of what the operation was like.
That's right. There is such a manual, just one manual, and that's very hard to get. So maybe we might have...
Do you know if it exists, or...
It does exist.
It does exist, but
Yes.
you haven't been able to get hold of
No.
it. How many were they?
It was a detachment commander, 3 signalers, and one medical officer and a consultant surgeon, able to...
The idea was that he would have to perform emergency or you know, operations, yes, in case the men went sick or something.
Ideally, the men would have been operated and had their appendix removed and tonsils and all the...
Before coming into the cave.
In.
Yes, to avoid the risk of that happening. We're standing in the main hall, and behind us is this little window with another proof, as if proof were needed, that this is what we say it is. What's behind that wall there?
What we have behind there is a 10,000 gallon water tank, which would have provided hopefully water for the whole year that we're here, drinking, bathing, whatever they needed it for.
And you've actually seen it still holds the water.
It's still actually full of water, yes.
Yeah. We've tried to run the tap, but of course the washers are and they don't run.
Yeah, we hope to hopefully clean that out one day, hope to see if we can get the water running through it.
Before the tap bursts, yeah?
There's actually a collection point underneath as well, which we presume might have been used for bathing at some time.
They would have perhaps, yes, used this for bathing, I would imagine. How long did it take you to come up with that detailed drawing? Because you had to measure everything out, no?
I spent a day or so just getting rough measurements, then went back to the computer, figured out some type of scale, and tried to work from that, and spent a couple of hours drawing that up. And then when I got the drawing, I wasn't happy with it at first, so I just did another one, and it looked a lot better with the scale.
What you would like to get hold of, obviously, is perhaps the manual, which might have the plan of the actual...
Yeah, the proper plans to see how accurate it actually was of it.
Because what we don't know, of course, is that this place might even have had other chambers that we may not have discovered yet. Could that be a possibility?
There is a possibility of that, because there is on the way in another blocked up entrance, which it may have been the original way in, it might lead somewhere else. There's also in this room a couple of bricks which look like it have been moved and replaced, so we'd like to look at that as well.
Have you also been moved with a curiosity to discover this place for many years?
Since I was very small, my granddad used to talk about Operation Monkey.
She'd heard about that, right? That's how you heard about it?
Operation Monkey, and my granddad used to work in the dockyard, everybody talked about it, and he was actually here during the war, so I thought, I started thinking about it then, and I always wanted to find the place, and in the end we did.
You always had the fascination, yeah, that you've got to discover this place, no? Now, what were your feelings, when you first sort of burst through the brickwork there and came into the place? Do you remember?
Well, the emotion is your stomach goes up into your mouth, basically,
Ian, you're just taking some observations there from the very, very narrow slit. Take a guess, how big is that slit?
It's roughly about 4 inches to 5 inches.
And it's quite narrow, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty narrow.
Pretty narrow, about half an inch, 3/4 of an inch. Now, what can you see from there?
From here you can quite clearly see the Bay of Gibraltar, the Bay of Algeciras. You can actually see Algeciras itself, its port, and just slightly, just beneath us, the actual harbour, or just outside the harbour of our own harbour.
So you would be able to make some very useful observations if there were
quite useful for a time.
Movements of shipping and all that. Well, perhaps some of the bushes that are spoiling the view now would not have existed then, no, I would imagine.
No. This part of this area outside, it's not in use that much. In those days, it would be much in use. So thus, or at least not so much vegetation would have been grown so much.
What would have been the chances of finding this small slit from the outside?
Slim, if hardly any.
If hardly any. It's actually what you was telling me, that it's actually on a water catchment. It's camouflaged as part of
camouflaged beneath. Well, it's actually camouflaged to look like a rock underneath an overhang in the water catchment itself.
Unless you've seen it from the inside, it's impossible to find it from the outside.
Impossible.
Right. So would you have? I mean, if a chance to be involved in an operation like this had come up, and obviously if you were trained and all that. Is this sort of operation something that you yourself would have volunteered for, had you been in the army in those days?
One thing is volunteering, and I think would have been past the vetting, or at least a psychological vetting behind it. Would have taken quite a start not to have been left behind, have been the ones chosen to have been stayed behind.
You reckon that the selection process would have been
hard.
Would have selected very, very high quality individuals for this sort of operation, no?
Yeah, people free of claustrophobic backgrounds, really
very stable characters,
to get on well with people,
right.
To have lived an X amount of time inside one of these tunnels, so like mingling with the rest of the...
They had to be pretty disciplined as well in themselves, no? To be able to get along with one another and everything else.
Definitely.
Yeah. John Paul, we're standing by what's left of a hand-operated bicycle type of generator, which used to generate the electricity to charge the batteries to operate the radio room, which we're also standing beside of. You yourself are a signaller, aren't you, in the army? So, I mean, picture yourself in the situation that you were walled in this cave to gather intelligence. What would your duties have been, would you think?
Well, as there were only 6 guys in here, 4 of them signallers, I think I would have dual duties. Apart from the main duty would have been signalling, obviously, but I've also had to report what I saw. So I would say, go up to the observation post, count how many ships there were in the bay, for example, come down, encode it onto an army code, and then via Morse code transmit on a high-frequency radio, transmit out of the cave on a high-frequency radio.
Right. For that, you would have needed a very long antenna, wouldn't you? So...
Yes, I think 18 feet of copper rod is the measurement of antenna that they were using. They would, using insulate like this.
Isolators.
Or insulators. Like this, so to isolate the aerial from any metallic objects. You push the rod through a hole. There are halfway up the steps, and this hole would emerge in the cliff face on the eastern side, and an 18-foot rod would dangle at the end of the cable, and nobody will be able to notice it because it will be done at night time, and at an angle that nobody will be able to see the hole. So they would just throw the antenna out, transmit very quickly, and then bring the antenna back in again.
And would there have been somebody already? Would there be a receiving facility? Would there have been a receiving facility here in the radio room?
No, I wouldn't think so, because batteries in those days couldn't hold power for too long. I reckon they would have set times which they would have to transmit from daily, and they would switch on, say 15 minutes before and then 50 minutes afterwards, charge up the batteries, transmit, receive any instructions they might have to receive, and then switch off. What
do you think, what sort of power would a hand-driven generator have, I mean, would have given the battery, autonomy, for an hour or something like that?
At most an hour. I don't know, I'm not that clued up on the kind of batteries and radios they had in those days. I know that nowadays, with the Army's got something similar, obviously much smaller scale, but it takes hours to charge up the battery. It's basically they would plug the battery in and then start charging it and use it at the same time they were charging it. That's the most obvious way to use it.
Did these fancy gas lamps that you're wearing on your helmet exist in those days, do you know?
Yes, I'm sure.
So they might have had, because I'm thinking that most of the time they would have operated in darkness because they didn't have any electricity here, except for the battery powered generator.
Yes, they could have used something like this. The only thing I might think that they might not have used this specific type of acetylene lamp is because it smells a bit. But they might have used fat lamps or some other kind of fuel that would burn without letting off an odor or smoke.
In the absence of the survival manual for Operation Tracer, we can only conjecture on what the lighting might have been. Candles, gas lamps, or perhaps fat burning lamps, as John Paul was just saying. We're now looking at the detailed plan that Mark Ainsworth has produced on his computer, based on his own measurements of the area that they have uncovered. Having seen the complex ourselves, it's easy to thinking that perhaps it was too big for only 6 men. But when you take account of the restrictions on noise, the lack of lighting, the lack of cooking and heating, poor ventilation, and not least the psychological impact of being walled in with only the sheer cliffs of the eastern slopes of the rock as an escape route. Of course, an escape could only be contemplated if Britain had lost the war. And such an escape would be dependent on whether you could actually negotiate the cliffs in the dark and slip into the sea for a swim of a couple of kilometers to the nearest Spanish beach across the border. Quite a prospect to ponder upon if you ever got fed up of being walled in. As we spent most of Tuesday morning in Tracer Cave, we had a few minutes to spare in which to try to get the water supply running again, as we knew that the 10,000-gallon water tank was full. A few knocks on the tap were enough to produce at first a jet-black stream of water, which then became crystal clear and odorless. This adds weight to the argument that the tank is constantly fed by a water catchment on top, and thus is always full of water if none is drained off. The heavy-duty brass tap, nearly 60 years old now, is a credit to English plumbing, and it was working perfectly after a few minutes. The main hall is about 15 meters by 5 meters and 2.5 meters high. The window opening at the back is also an access to the water tank for chlorinating the water supply. The floor is still covered with soft cork tiles to provide insulation and warmth, and more importantly, to cut down on noise. The tiling was arranged in such a way as to show a clear center aisle and sides for stores and equipment. The length could also be useful for exercise walks or even short runs. From notes produced by Richard Durrell, we can conjecture on what diet the men would have been on. Mostly ration packs, which consisted of soups that were chemically heated by pulling the ring tops, tinned bacon, salted or smoked fish and meats, powdered dry rations such as biscuits, potatoes, milk and eggs, as well as boiled sweets, barley sugar and dried fruit. For all that, proper sanitation was plumbed in. Unfortunately, the roof of the 2 latrines have caved in, but one can't help thinking that without forced air circulation, odors would not have been very pleasant in Tracer Cave for very long. From an article in Gibraltar magazine dated October last year and credited to Lynn Waits, a photograph of an Antarctic survival cave of just 4 meters by 3 meters, which housed 5 men for many months during Scott's ill-fated expedition to the Antarctica. Expertise from that survival story was brought to Operation Tracer by naval surgeon Dr. Murray Levick. Of the 6 men who were to have been the stay-behind boys, we only know the names of 2, both Royal Navy Volunteer Reserves and both surgeon lieutenants. One was called Cooper and the other Milner. Assuming that they would have been the eldest of the team, and again assuming them to be in their mid-20s, they would now be in their early 80s if they're still alive. Some of the signallers or their commanding officer might also be alive today. Would it not be a great story if they all came out to see Tracer Cave again? Although the 4 lads from the Gibraltar Caving Group are only a 3-year-old association, last year they discovered another cave which they called Rich Sands Cave, after Richard Durrell, who first came across it.
It was a very small cave, and it was it was a virgin cave. It was
Never been excavated before, right? Nobody been in there.
And we informed Clive Finson about this area, and we wanted to go and further the cave because there was a lot of evidence of the progression of the cave. So we started doing an excavation under the supervision of Clive Finson. And we took about 4 months to do it. And we found a lot of lithic remains, artifacts, flints.
Have any of the items that you found in Rich Sands Cave, that's what you called it, found their way into the museum displays?
That's right. The actual cranium was sent to the museum. It was left there for 3 months for drying. And last August, Chris Stringer from the British Museum came over and inspected the skull, and he has taken it away for radiocarbon dating. And he will give us a full report of the actual cranium, whether it's lithic, Neolithic, actual.
We don't know the period yet.
Whether it is a female or a male, so we don't know the period.
We're not going to give away the location of this cave, but I'm just going to ask you, was the cave very high up, or was it near near the shore or near the sea?
It's a sea cave.
It's a sea cave.
It's a sea cave, so it was just about 2 meters from the sea.
And we'll just say it was a general area of Europe.
That's right.
Tracer Cave is really a tunnel system within an older cave system high up on the rock. The location must be kept a secret because it would be tragic to lose the evidence of what up to now had been considered an unlikely story. We'll leave you now with the view that has not changed much in the last 40,000 years, when Neanderthal man, or better still, Gibraltar man, would have been surveying the Mediterranean. Perched high up on the rock, perhaps on the ledge of the eastern observation post of Tracer Cave.